There is a moment that happens on a farm right before everything falls apart. It does not announce itself. There is no dramatic scene. It is quiet. A farmer walks the edge of a field, looks at the soil he has worked his whole life, does the math one more time in his head, and the math still does not work. So he turns around, walks back to the house, picks up the phone, and calls his landlord. And in that phone call, he says something that would have been unthinkable to his father. He says he is giving the land back. That moment is happening across Georgia right now, not on one farm, not on 10 farms, across an entire region. And the people running this state, the ones whose job it is to protect the #1 industry in Georgia, are starting to look like they are losing the battle. This is the story of how one of America's most agriculturally powerful states got here, and why the decisions being made right now will determine whether Georgia farming survives the next decade. One of the most decorated producers in southwest Georgia, a man who broke the world soybean yield record 2 years in a row, sat down in late 2025, graded every acre of his 6,000-acre operation from A to F, and walked away from 3,000 of them. He called 12 landlords in 3 weeks and handed the ground back. This is not a struggling farmer who never figured it out. This is the best in the world at what he does, and even he could not make the numbers work anymore. Farms? We are literally paying to farm, not getting paid to farm, he said. We can grow most any variety of crop in the world right here, but we're at the point of seeing what happens when none of them will turn a profit. Farms. And here's the part that should stop you cold. He predicted that in 2026, there would be even more unplanted acres across southwest Georgia than in 2025, and that landlords still do not fully understand the shift. There are no longer 10 farmers lined up to bid on that ground. People are not beating down anybody's door. The dynamic has completely flipped. Farms. So how did Georgia, a state that produces pecans, cotton, peanuts, blueberries, poultry, timber, corn, and soybeans, end up here? The answer is not one thing. It never is with agriculture. It is a stack of crises, each one landing before the last one healed. Start with the storm. Hurricane Helene tore through Georgia and wiped out approximately 1/3 of the state's pecan and cotton crops and damaged 1.5 million acres of timber. Visualize that. 1.5 million acres of productive timberland destroyed. Pecan trees that took decades to grow, gone. Cotton fields flattened. And behind the physical destruction, something even harder to recover from. The debt that farmers had already taken on for that season's inputs still sitting on the books with nothing to sell against it. AgWeb. The federal disaster relief, a block grant of more than $500 million, did not begin flowing until March of 2026, over a year after the storm hit. In farm economics, a year is an eternity. Operating loans compound. Equipment notes come due. Landlords want their rent whether the crop made it or not. By the time that check arrived, many of the farms it was meant to save had already made their decisions. Some had already filed. AgWeb. Georgia recorded 27 Chapter 12 farm bankruptcies in 2025, more than double the year before, and the second highest of any state in the country. Nationally, farm bankruptcies surged 46% in a single year, with 315 filings across the country. But bankruptcy filings are, by definition, a lagging indicator. They represent the farms that could not hold on any longer. The farms still holding, on fumes, on prayer, on one more operating loan. Those don't show up in the data yet. Megaproject House. The state's own agriculture commissioner stood up and said it plainly. Farm families have run out of equity. They have run out of ways to stretch that dollar thin. When the person whose job it is to advocate for farmers tells you farmers have nothing left, you believe him. Agro-information. And then came the tariffs. On top of everything else, on top of the hurricane damage, on top of the bankruptcies, on top of the commodity price pressure, input costs started climbing because of trade policy. Fertilizer prices in 2026 are running 10 to 15% higher than they were just 1 year ago, driven in part by tariffs. The cost of fuel, equipment, and chemicals followed the same direction, and at the same time input costs went up. The markets Georgia farmers sell into shrank because trading partners hit American agriculture with retaliatory tariffs of their own. Ag Daily. A survey found that 78% of Southern farmers were unable to afford all the fertilizer they needed, the highest percentage of any region in the nation. That means before a single seed goes in the ground, more than 3 out of 4 farmers in Georgia and across the South are already compromising. They are planting with less, which means they will harvest less, which means the math gets worse again next year. AgWeb. Agricultural experts say the pressure is a combination of repeated weather disasters, higher costs across every input category, and rising interest rates that make borrowing more expensive precisely at the moment farmers need to borrow more just to survive. Farm progress. The state government is not sitting still. 10 pieces of agricultural legislation were signed into law, including tax exemptions on disaster relief payments, streamlined conservation programs, and new protections for prescribed burning. That matters. Real dollars, real relief in specific categories. But farmers on the ground will tell you what those bills cannot fix. They cannot change commodity prices. They cannot reverse a year of hurricane damage. They cannot make a trading partner buy your soybeans when tariffs made them too expensive. University of Illinois. When the U.S. Agriculture Secretary came to Atlanta and stood under the Gold Dome, the assessment was stark. The farm economy is still the worst we have seen in decades, perhaps in our lifetime. That statement was delivered not in a congressional hearing, not in a think tank report, but standing in the Georgia state capitol, in the heart of one of the hardest-hit agricultural states in the country. And still, the weight of what that sentence means hasn't fully landed in the national conversation. AgWeb. Total farm debt nationwide is now projected to hit a record $624 billion in 2026. Net farm income is declining for a 4th year. Industry analysts are calling this a generational downturn. The comparison being made, quietly, carefully, but with real conviction, is to the 1980s farm crisis. That crisis did not just hurt farmers, it hollowed out rural communities across entire regions of this country. Towns that had thrived for a century lost their grocery stores, their hospitals, their schools. Some of them never came back. Construction equipment. Georgia is not there yet, but Southwest Georgia, the same region where that world record soybean grower handed back 3,000 acres, is showing what the early stages of that collapse look like. Ground that went unworked in 2025, more ground expected to sit idle in 2026. Landlords who do not yet understand that the bidding wars for their acreage are over. Generational farmers cutting back, walking away, or drowning in Chapter 12, farms. The land itself does not disappear. The fields will still be there next spring, but the people who knew how to work that land, who understood those soils, those crops, that climate, those people once gone do not simply come back. Farming is not a skill you pick up in a weekend. It is decades of accumulated knowledge about one specific piece of ground. When that knowledge walks away, it is extraordinarily difficult to replace.
What is happening in Georgia and across rural America right now is the product of seesawing trade policies, years of input cost inflation, drastic cuts to farm programs, and decades of policy that has consistently favored large industrial operations over the family farms that built these communities. The family farm is not just a romantic idea, it's a functional economic unit that anchors a rural community. When it fails, the mechanic shop loses a customer, the feed store loses a customer, the diner loses a customer, the school loses a family. And somewhere in southwest Georgia tonight, there is another farmer staring at another field, doing that math one more time, hoping it comes out different than it did last time, hoping the check comes through, hoping the commodity price holds,